Hello there, fellow food geeks, and welcome to the
Alright,
very
hey
first
everybody,
episode of our
welcome
new
back
video
to my
series,
channel and
Food
love
Science
it. You're
101,
everyone's
produced
Nora,
by
you're
StellaCulinary.com. And in this
at
episode
the
and the
movie.
following episode, we will be discussing the science
Alright,
behind
now we
emulsion.
have to.
Now, whether you
I'm
know
sorry,
it or
but
not, you come
actually
across
never
emulsions
happened
in
to
your
me.
day-to-day life,
Of
both
course.
inside and
Well,
outside
one more
of
minute
the
ago,
kitchen. And the better you understand what an
Thank you.
emulsion is, the better you'll be able to
Don't worry
understand the
about
underlying
it.
technique and
You
the fundamentals
don't
of
careful, I
creating a
have
great
a nice
emulsion.
place, everyone.
Now, we
I'm
all
your
understand, just through
iPhone.
basic
It's your
observation,
fat and
that fat and
water.
water generally do not
God.
like one
Now
another.
we
They do
have
not
a new
commonly
one.
mix
Oh,
together. But
dare.
when making an emulsion,
Really?
you can actually
I
take this fat, you can
you
drop
know.
it into the
I
water,
don't know.
disperse it throughout
No,
the
you
water,
don't have a lot
creating a
either.
homogenized state,
You know?
or an
No,
emulsion.
you don't. I'm
Now,
not
what
going
makes
here.
this
I
special
don't know.
is the fact that we are combining two liquids, water and fat, fat being a liquid and water being a liquid. But when these two liquids are combined, they still maintain their distinct characteristics.
Where you going up there,
In this example, I'm showing you a basic fat dispersed into water emulsification, and this will cover things like hollandaise, mayonnaise, milk and cream. Also, you can have the reverse, where you can have some fat, and in that fat you can disperse some water. And because they're still maintaining their distinct characteristics, it is still an emulsion, but now you just have the water dispersed in fat. And this is commonly seen in vinaigrettes and also whole butter. Now, the fact that you are combining fat and water together, and they are maintaining their distinct characteristics even after being combined, is in contrast to some of the elements of alcohol. We know that alcohol and water, they like each other, and they can freely mix with one another. So if you take the water and you pour it into the alcohol, you will get an alcohol and water solution. And because alcohol and water freely mix, they can never form an emulsification. It isn't possible.
Oh my god.
And this is a good thing. This is what makes things like cocktails possible, wine possible, and beer possible. Just stop and think for a second. If fat or if alcohol reacted to water, like fat does, then when you go and you open up that nice bottle of wine, you wouldn't have wine, you would have grape juice with pure alcohol floating on top, which would be a bummer. So you will come across some common culinary emulsions in your day-to-day life in the kitchen, and it is important to understand what these emulsions are. Now, some of the biggies are going to be egg-based, which is, hollandaise is one of the 5 French vanilla sauces, and it is considered egg-based emulsification. You also have mayonnaise, which is a cold derivative of hollandaise, and also aioli, which is a derivative of mayonnaise. Now, commonly, too, you will find and milk is an emulsification because it does contain a small amount of fat, and instead of that fat separating and floating on top of the milk, it is homogenized throughout the milk. And also cream, which is just like milk with a higher fat content. Vinaigrettes, which you use to dress your salads. And whole butter, which more butter, more better. And of course, pan sauces, which there's been a couple of technique videos that we've released at StellaCulinary.com on pan sauces. Now, normally we will finish a pan sauce by swirling in some fat, usually butter, but sometimes cream. This is actually to add Now, on some common non-culinary emulsions that you will come across in your day-to-day life, and these include some paste, cosmetic creams, and oil. You first have to understand how emulsion really works. Now, here is a common site where we have a container of water, and in that container of water is some fat. And of course, the fat is floating on top. Now, this happens because, chemically speaking, when two chemicals do not like one another, they will align themselves in such a fashion to where they will touch as little as possible. And this is called surface tension. And the concept of surface tension is important to understand because the entire emulsification process is actually there to break down this surface tension, which will allow you to form an emulsification. Now, as we talked about earlier, you can have fat dispersed into water or water dispersed into fat, and they are still both emulsifications. So in this example, in the following example, we're just going to assume that we're making a fat dispersed emulsification. So what we need to do is we need to disperse the continuous phase. The continuous phase is only way to
All
remember
right,
this is
you're
continuous
getting around to
contain.
do it.
Continuous contain.
Careful, are you
So the
doing
continuous
it? Are
phase
you
is going
serious?
to contain
No.
the dispersed
We
phase
don't hear
or the
you
contained or
either.
the containee.
I'm sorry.
And
Actually,
so
what to
it's
do is,
important
I'm
to
helping
keep
her.
track
Rex, you one more.
of
Over here. No, you don't have to. Hey, no,
you
me.
add
Hey,
more of your
don't
continuous
touch
phase.
it, Iva.
And when you need to thicken your
Well,
emulsification,
I have
you
yet to
add
do
more
it.
of your dispersed
Quietly,
phase.
I have a law.
It really is that simple. Now, how do we break down this surface tension and disperse
You're not allowed.
our
What
fat
on earth?
into our water?
Well,
You do
I
this
think
by
you heard her
applying
quietly.
shearing power.
But you never know
And
what
shearing
anymore.
power will
Doesn't
break
let
up
her
the
serve
dispersed
it.
phase
No,
and
you
distribute
can't.
it throughout your continuous phase, creating what we call
You
an
don't
emulsified
tackle.
state. Now,
Listen,
what is
what
this
do you
magical
do? You
shearing
like that
power
shit?
that I
Hey,
speak of?
hey, everybody.
Well, it can
Let's
be
see
something
what
as
a
simple
roll.
as just shaking,
No.
right? You combine
Over
oil
here.
and vinegar
Get
into a
over.
container,
Let
you
me
put on
show
the
you
lid, you
around.
shake it up.
First
It will
state?
that shaking
No, why
force
not?
will break up the vinegar
Hey,
enough to where it
stop.
disperses it throughout the
Stop
oil,
sneezing at me.
creating a temporary
What?
emulsification. When you set that same
Don't
vinaigrette
shout,
down
Pippo.
on your table and let it
You're
rest
gonna crumble.
without any sort of movement,
They haven't.
they will quickly realign themselves
Hey,
and
girls, I think
recreate
you
that
want
surface
more.
tension.
Hey,
Now, if you
boys,
apply a
the
whisk, you are
water.
applying a little bit
Goodness
more
knows.
shearing
Don't
power.
touch your
It will give
eyebrow
you a
yet.
little bit more smaller particles or fat droplets, giving you a slightly more stable emulsion. And also a blender
I
or a
guess you
food
know it. I
processor
got her
or
rules, Lions.
an immersion blender,
What?
they
What's your
all
word? No.
have the capabilities. They
I
all have a
don't
higher
care
shearing
for
power than a
you,
whisk,
my
which gives them the
friend.
capabilities to break up the dispersed phase
I'm
into
saying
much
for
smaller
fun, honey.
particles than
No,
a whisk
Lauren,
would
you don't
or
care for her
a
life
shaking
here.
motion would.
Understanding
Now, this is
history.
important because, generally speaking,
All right.
the dispersed phase
Everyone
will be
here?
broken
No,
up, and
I
it will be
get
as
it.
small
Don't
as
you
anywhere
lie
from
either.
1,000th of a
No.
millimeter across to 10,000ths of a millimeter across.
What's happened?
And just to put this into
Can you go in
perspective,
a millennium?
1 tablespoon of oil
All
is
right.
into
Don't
30
touch.
billion droplets
Now or
just by
right,
using
you
a
one more
whisk.
minute before I
That's
enter.
3,000ths of a millimeter across. Now, this is important because the smaller fat particles are, the more stable an emulsion will be, and the higher fat content is possible in that emulsion. Now, the way that I like to visualize this is just think for a second of, grabbing a hand of very fine soot and throwing it up into the air. Now, it will take a little while before that soot, because it's the particles are so fine, it will take a while for that soot to actually settle back out of the air and land onto the ground. Now, this is in contrast to something like a handful of sand or a handful of gravel. You pick it up, you throw it in the air, it'll settle relatively quickly to the ground versus the soot.
I'm here.
So
The glider.
the takeaway is the smaller or the finer your particles are in your dispersed phase, the more stable your emulsion will be, and the longer it will take for them to settle out of the emulsion or out of the continuous phase. But this also has an added benefit of surface area, right? We've talked about in some of our lecture series, when we talk about flavor structure and flavor, that our flavor perception, usually as much as 70% of it can come from aroma. But most aroma molecules are only soluble in fat. So the smaller you can get your fat in your dispersed phase, the more surface area you will have for those aroma molecules to first dissolve onto the fat surface and then release rapidly into your nose when that fat or that emulsification is put into your mouth. Now, you can take this concept too far. There is a law of diminishing returns, because what happens is, so you have your emulsified state here down in your bottom left-hand corner of your screen, and the more fat you add, the thicker the emulsification will become. Right? But for the most part, in most applications, the volume of the dispersed phase should not exceed 3 times the volume of the continuous phase. And this is because emulsifications by nature are basically unstable. And what happens is, when you have too much of the dispersed phase, they start cramming closer and closer and closer together, and they'll start knocking into each other, pooling. And as they pool, they'll start to recreate that surface tension. And when that surface tension is recreated, and the dispersed phase, in this case being the fat, will float to the top. And this is what you call coalescing. And in kitchen terms, this is what we call a broken sauce. Frowny face, because broken sauces are kind of a bummer. But you can avoid this from happening by using emulsifiers and stabilizers, which we will talk about in part 2 of our emulsification video.
You're glad to help.